Hello, my name is Michelle Martin. I am the Peterson Business Librarian at Greenwich Library, and welcome to Date with an Author. My date today is Heather Cabot. Heather Cabot is the author of the new Chardonnay, The Unlikely Story of How Marijuana Went Mainstream, published by Penguin Random House on August 11th. Heather Cabot is an award-winning journalist and former ABC News correspondent and anchor, and former digital lifestyle editor at Yahoo. She is a contributor to Forbes and the co-author of the acclaimed Geek Girl Rising: Inside the Sisterhood Shaking Up Tech. Heather has also a podcast out covering the new Chardonnay. Signed copies of the book will be available for purchase at Diane's Books. Hi, Heather. Congratulations on your book, and thank you for taking the time out to talk with us today.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much. It's really an honor and a privilege, especially to speak to a community so close to where I live.
To start us out, Heather, can you give us a brief synopsis of the book?
Sure. So the book is really about these four intrepid entrepreneurs who are starting out in 2012, trying to race to cash in on cannabis. And through their wild and wacky stories, I examine the economic, the cultural, the political forces that have really come to bear and brought us to this inflection point in America and frankly the world on cannabis and cannabis use. And for me, I'm a just say no mom. I grew up in the 80s. I grew up with all those PSAs about, just say no, and the egg on the frying pan, and this is your brain on drugs. That was the way I grew up. And then to be now a mom of teens, looking around and seeing how normalized marijuana is, celebrities talking about it, gleaming dispensaries, that I was seeing pictures of, reading an Oprah magazine about THC infused tea parties. I just couldn't believe it. And I thought it was kind of astonishing. And so that led me to start asking some questions and start investigating how this all happened. So the book really is kind of looking at this astonishing rebranding of cannabis in a very short time.
It's funny you say intrepid, because that is exactly the word I have in my question, which was, can you tell us, the way you structure the book, it follows these early investors who are definitely intrepid, and the different ways that they approach the industry, right? They're all coming at it at different angles, which was really illuminating. Can you just tell us a little bit about the unique challenges each of them faced and who they are?
Sure. So I thank you so much. I love that you said illuminating, because that's exactly what I was going for. And as I said earlier, I really went into this book as a complete voyeur. This was not part of my life at all. I didn't know anything about the industry. And once I started to try to get my arms around it, I realized that it is incredibly, the topic of marijuana legalization is incredibly controversial and complicated and nuanced. And it touches on so many different interesting issues, whether it's politics or business or science, medicine, wellness, social justice. You name it, it touches on all of these different things. So I knew that if I was going to be able to sort of boil down this story to its essence, I had to find characters, real life people, but characters that my readers could relate to help explain and unravel this rebranding, as I said. So the four main characters are Beth Stavola, who is this Jersey Shore mother of six, former Wall Street shark, who sort of unexpectedly ends up becoming an early investor in Arizona's medical cannabis market in 2012. And her story really represents a couple of things. First of all, Beth is one of the only women in the US to ever build a multi-state legal cannabis operation. And that's significant because, and what I wanted to show through Beth's story is that even though cannabis is federally legal, there are 33 states and 11 where it's legal, 33 plus, including 11 for adult use. And there's no sort of national brands yet, because every single company has to literally build their presence state by state. So you're building your footprint state by state. And so I wanted people to understand how complicated that is. And so Beth starts out in Arizona. And the other thing that Beth represents as well is she's, not only is she one of the only women, but she's also self-financing this. And that in many ways that really typifies the early people who got into this industry, because these are incredibly difficult businesses to build. They're very capital intensive. It's federally illegal, so you can't get a loan. And so many of these early people were people who were independently wealthy or had a network that they could draw on. And then the last thing that Beth's story in many ways I think really symbolizes is this merging of this industry coming out of the shadows and people with really legitimate business credentials coming in. And part of Beth's story that you'll see is how she has to figure out who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And that is a theme throughout the US, wherever I visited. I mean, that was something that came up a lot because there were people coming in with money, but who just didn't have the expertise. So they had to figure out, who are these people with domain expertise? Well, who were they? They were people who had been working in the shadows for so many years. And while there are, a lot of really upstanding people who made their livings that way, there are other people who, who were not, and kind of unsavory. And so Beth's story is about that. The second main character is Bruce Linton, who's the founder of Canopy Growth, which is one of the largest legal cannabis companies on the planet, first publicly traded cannabis company. And his story is really about what happened in Canada. And I really wanted, so to understand what's happened with the industry in the US, you have to understand the role of Canada in all of this. And Canada was the first G7 nation in the world to legalize cannabis across all of its provinces. And I happened to be reporting the book as this was happening. And so Bruce is in there because first of all, he's a visionary. And I think he also demonstrates, again, how hard it is to build these businesses from scratch and how to sort of flip this illegal market into a legal one, and what happens, and all the things that he had to learn. And so through his story, I hope the audience will sort of understand a little bit more about how these businesses work. But Bruce's story also really relates to the title, The New Chardonnay, because his dream was to really go after, as a number of these other characters, to go after the Chardonnay moms, to go after people like me, people like you, people who, aren't interested in being couch locked or, or turned off by some of these stoner stereotypes of our youth. But could potentially be convinced to swap a glass of wine for another type of substance if we knew how it would feel, if we knew if it was predictable, if it didn't have calories, if it didn't give us a hangover. And that was his vision, was to create this cannabis beverage of the future. And so I thought that was really interesting. And we take you inside his lab in rural Ontario, and he's called the Willy Wonka of weed in the book because improbably the headquarters of the company was founded inside a former Hershey's chocolate factory. So I don't want to give away too much about that, but Bruce is, his story, through his story, you'll learn a lot about some of the innovations happening and the competition that cannabis is giving to alcohol, and maybe even some thoughts about, what could happen in the future. So the third character is Ted Chung. And Ted Chung, everybody knows Snoop Dogg, but Ted Chung is actually his manager and his longtime business partner. And Ted is this amazing, also another visionary. He grew up, the son of immigrants from South Korea. His dad was, self-made man, and, entrepreneurship is in his blood. And he sort of is, in some ways, I guess, maybe an unlikely person to end up partnering with Snoop. And so we go into his backstory a bit. But what I really wanted to tell through Ted's story was I wanted to touch on a couple of things. I wanted to talk about how pop culture has influenced our thinking around cannabis legalization and the normalization of it. And I also wanted to explain to the audience how huge this industry is. And through Ted's story, you learn about the fact that they were very early, Snoop and Ted were very early thinking about not just businesses that sort of grow and manufacture, derivatives of the plant and retail. They wanted to invest in businesses that actually supported the industry. So software and lab testing equipment, compliance systems, kind of like not sexy stuff, but really stuff, businesses that underpin the entire industry and make it a legitimate industry. And they were one of the first to actually found a venture capital firm called Casa Verde Capital to invest in some of these businesses. And they've been pretty successful in building a really interesting portfolio. And so I take you into that world and try to explain to the audience that this is so much more than just sort of, growing weed. And then the last character is, he's just this lovable guy. It's Chef Jeff Danzer. Or some people now know him as Jeff the 420 Chef. That became his sort of moniker. He, to me, sort of represents the everyman. So he is a guy who, always had an affinity for cannabis, but also loved cooking. And so through his story, you follow his journey to go after his dream to become a cannabis chef. And he also has an amazing backstory about why he ended up even getting into cannabis. And part of it is that he grew up as an Orthodox Jew in a neighborhood in Los Angeles called Fairfax, lived a very traditional lifestyle, married, was living in the suburbs of New York City, a dad of 3 boys. And after 9/11, he sort of had this turning point where he felt that he finally had to reveal to his family that he had been living closeted. He was actually a gay man and had been, not living his truth, and got divorced and kind of started his life over. And that moment ended up setting the stage for later when he would take this risk to leave his job as a marketing exec and go full force into becoming this cannabis chef, and to capitalize on what was happening in Colorado and Washington and ultimately California. And so what's great about his story is I was able to use his story to expose the audience to some of the science of cannabis, and to be able to talk about some of the therapeutic applications that are out there, and also to talk about through his parents, which was very unexpected, but to be able to, through his parents, talk about the growing number of seniors and boomers who are experimenting with cannabis now to deal with things like chronic pain and insomnia and stress. And so that was a really, so that's sort of an overview, a long overview of the 4 main characters, and all of their stories intersect, as you'll see in the book, which I didn't expect when I first was starting out 3 years ago. I didn't know how their stories would intersect. And that I was very lucky that I could sort of be a fly on the wall with them for 3 years, just following their ups and downs. So it was a really amazing, unforgettable journey.
It's funny you say that, because I thought, wait, how did they all kind of cross paths? Because they all start out approaching the industry very differently from each other. It was interesting about how Ted Chung and Snoop Dogg, they were not, as you say, touching the plant. Mm-hmm. So they were, and I think that might have also, and also the characters, some have no passion for marijuana. It's more the entrepreneurial opportunities that it is presenting, whereas others are driven by their passions to commit to this. There, you also go over all of these various dichotomies, like THC versus CBD versus medical versus legal versus medical versus recreational, legal, illegal. Do you want to just clarify some of these terms? I mean, these are new terms that I think a lot of us just have this perception of what pot is, and it's become so much more than that.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of it really comes down, if you can believe it, this is like so unsexy, but it comes down to plant science. It comes down to botany, really. So I had to learn about all of this stuff. But you know, when people hear THC and CBD, those are just two of the compounds that are in the cannabis plant. They're the two that most people know of the most, but there are actually, some people say, you know, more than 100 of these various different phytochemicals in cannabis. We don't actually know what all of them do yet. And I think that's really interesting and very ripe for research in the future. We're just starting to learn about some of these other compounds and how they can affect the body. So THC is the one that most of us know about, and that refers to the intoxicating compound of the plant, sort of the mind-altering phytochemical. And then CBD refers to another major cannabinoid. These are called cannabinoids in the lingo. And CBD is not intoxicating, but has been known to have, and shown in some early studies, to have some effect on inflammation. It has been used, well, what's really interesting, this happened during the reporting of the book, but the FDA actually approved the very first cannabis-derived CBD drug called Epidiolex, which is used to treat a couple of very rare seizure disorders in children. So there is certainly emerging research around the efficacy of CBD to treat a wide range of ailments. And we're really just sort of at the beginning of that. I think where people get confused, and I do try to explain this in the book, and this goes to the legal, illegal issue, is that CBD can be found in hemp, which is basically cannabis, but it's a high CBD variety of the cannabis plant. And in the old days, in colonial times, it's a very fibrous plant, so it was used for things like rope and making clothing and all kinds of things. And people also did use to smoke it, you know, way back in the day. When the Controlled Substance Act came into being under President Nixon, they lumped hemp into the same category as sort of the high THC variety of cannabis. And so until 2018, CBD itself was considered, you know, Schedule 1. And so it was also federally legal, except for some small pilot programs that led by Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, the majority leader. He had gotten through in an earlier farm bill, so some states were able to experiment with growing it. So by the end of 2018, though, Congress approved the farm bill, which effectively allowed farms and manufacturers and retailers to get into this hemp industry. And that's why now you see CBD products, hemp oil products. And I can't get into, there's so much to tell you about that. I'll just say that this is why you're seeing it at CVS, and you're seeing it at Bed Bath & Beyond, and you're seeing it all these other places because of the farm bill. One thing on this point that I will say is it is not regulated very well. And there are still lots of questions about labeling. People don't really know how much CBD you should take for certain things. Doctors are not really educated on it. So while it is everywhere, I think that everyone in the industry is certainly waiting for, at some point, the federal government to come in with some more guidance for consumers, because there is a lot of snake oil out there, and there certainly are lots of products that say they have certain amounts of CBD that don't have what they say is on the label. There's just a lot of confusion about it, but I think that the most important, just to clarify for the audience, that THC is the intoxicating kind, and that's, you know, where you'll find that in the legal cannabis states like Colorado and California, or medical states like New York and Connecticut as well, where there are medical programs and you can get a doctor's recommendation to take THC types of products. But CBD, for the most part, you can find almost everywhere because it comes from this high CBD variety of the plant. So I hope that, does that kind of explain the distinction? It's confusing.
Well, you know, I think, yes, it does. And of course, your book goes into it much more deeply. It definitely clarified so much for me because, again, I think many of us just think of somebody smoking smoking a joint. And
well, so did I. So did I. That was me too. Like coming in, absolutely. That's what I thought. And if I can add one other little point, the other thing that I did learn that was completely new to me is I didn't understand that about all of these derivative products. Like I had heard about edibles, but I didn't know what that was. I thought like that was someone, grinding up, I don't know, like dried weed and throwing it into brownies. Like I didn't understand about the oils. I didn't understand that there's actually like a crude oil that is extracted from the plant that, in states like, California and I mean, all the states where it's legal, there are these major operations set up where to extract these oils and then to be able to convert them into different formulations for all different kinds of products that I didn't even know existed. So I think it's important for people to understand this is not just about sort of smoking a joint like that we remember from way back when. This is about a whole range of derivative products, and some of them are very, very potent. And the other thing is that I think the industry is still, one of the things they're very much focused on is how do you create a predictable experience? How do you, I mentioned dosing, whether it's a THC or a CBD product, we're sort of a long way away from really figuring out how it affects different people's bodies. It's not like drinking a glass of wine where you sort of know your tolerance. And also it takes time for some of these products to kick in. When we're talking about edibles or beverages, it's not like you just, and everybody I'm sure read the Maureen Dowd piece from Colorado where she ate too much of the chocolate bar. That's very real, and so a lot of regulations have come in around labeling, but even so there are many new people trying this stuff and they don't realize that there's a delay, and a lot of the products are not that predictable yet. And that's the brands that are going to emerge, the ones that are really going to be the ones that'll be the future Budweisers or whatever you want, the new Chardonnays. Those are the ones that are going to have that predictable experience where you feel safe actually consuming it. Or very, very much in the early stages of that.
There's a passage in your book that really illustrates how marijuana has become much more mainstream. I wonder if you could read that passage for us?
Sure. So it's called Pot on Prime Time. It's chapter 15. And the setting is Los Angeles, August 2016. Under dreamy Hollywood lighting, a glowing Martha Stewart delicately sprinkled fresh spinach and mint on a 3-cheese pizza while soothing music played in the background. It seemed like a promo for another new show starring the celebrity homemaker. But then the music shifted to a hip-hop beat. It turned out Snoop Dogg would be in the kitchen too. Just to clarify, I'm not high right now, but whoever gave us this show must have been, Snoop laughed while cuddling up with Martha in PJs under a blanket in the slick commercial promoting the duo's unexpected new show on VH1. The big reveal at the end of the summer of 2016 was the culmination of years of development and creative collaboration driven by none other than Mary Jane, the cannabis media company Ted Chung and his marijuana think tank had conceived back in 2013. For Ted, the matchup of Martha and Snoop presented an opportunity to take normalization of pot consumption to a completely new level. Perhaps it would be a Will and Grace moment, just as that hit show had helped move the needle toward acceptance of marriage equality in the late 90s. There was no doubt about the power of entertainment and media to change public perceptions and help erase long-held stigmas. Interestingly enough, pollsters had compared favorable attitudes of marijuana legalization to the trajectory of same-sex marriage. Would this celebrity pairing resonate with the middle American moms and grandmoms who admired Martha's sensibilities and taste, and piqued their interest in Snoop's favorite pastime, which would be prominently featured? And that's that.
Thank you. That was great. And so who do you see now being the consumers of marijuana? I mean, I guess, is it just young moms or what age groups do you see going towards marijuana now that it's becoming more mainstream?
Well, I think certainly the millennials have always been, a driving force. But I will say that, looking at, there are now companies that actually collect these insights, whether it's from retail sales, where people are actually walking into a dispensary and buying it in legal states, or through online delivery services. And I write about that a little bit in the book, about sort of how technology and algorithms were able to sort of track and surface data about who the new consumers would be. But the two fastest growing groups are women and also seniors. And that's been consistent. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think one of the reasons is that the brands, once they realized that these could be potential markets for them, they really shifted the way that they were doing their marketing. And then CBD, I think, the farm bill and the availability of CBD around the country, I think made made a whole, the availability of it for people who were craving a different way to maybe deal with pain or insomnia or stress, people who were, suspicious of traditional pharmaceuticals, who wanted something that was plant-based and natural. I think they really tapped into that. And then of course, sort of, among boomers, and then even older seniors, they all remember, many of them remember the way back. They remember the 60s. Maybe they were flower children. And so even though the products today are very different and many of them can be more potent, I think there was a certain knowledge of it and acceptance of it from way back. And so those groups were maybe more open to it. And then add on the fact that CBD is not intoxicating, it just made them feel more open to it, I think. And then they're dealing with, I went to, one of my most eye-opening things I did was I spent time with seniors in California. I went to two different events. One was I actually went on the cannabis shuttle with a group of seniors from one of the largest over 55 communities in America. It's called Laguna Woods Village in Orange County. And there's a monthly shuttle that takes a group of people, there are about 40 of them, who went on a bus to a dispensary in Santa Ana, which is just up the highway. But you have to get on the 405, which is a really busy freeway. So they have this free shuttle. And I went with all of these different people who were very open about the fact that a number of the people were on a lot of different medications previously, and they wanted to try something different. And one lady in particular was telling me she had neuropathy, and she was telling me about how she'd been on this cocktail of different drugs to deal with the pain. And she actually had a bad reaction to one of them, and it was her son that said, maybe you should go to a dispensary and talk to the people there and see if there's a product that you might want to try to help with pain. And so she was there. And so there were all kinds of people like that who I met. And then I also went to another senior fair. So that was like in Southern California. Then I went to another event in Northern California where there were all of these different, and a lot of these events are educational, by the way, because, as I said earlier, I coming in, I didn't know about a lot of there's so many different kinds of products now. And so part of the marketing for a lot of these companies is to create opportunities for the brands to speak directly to consumers. And so this other event that I went to that was in Marin was kind of the same thing. And it was all of these different brands just sitting there and presenting their products to these people my parents' age, and, talking with them about their arthritis or insomnia or various things that they were dealing with, and different products that might potentially help. There was an appetite there that I thought was so fascinating, that for those people the stigma didn't really matter. They had sort of moved past it. They really just wanted something for relief. So I found that fascinating.
The book also talks about the criminal justice system and how it's kind of in flux with the legalization of marijuana. How do you see that going as more states legalize? And are the people who are incarcerated for marijuana possession or selling, how are they treated in states where it is legal now recreationally, but in states where it's not legal? Is this all going to get resolved federally, or what's the future for that?
I think the hope is that it will get resolved federally, and that's why I think during the Democratic primary, you heard the issue of marijuana legalization being talked about on the debate stage in prime time. I think that there is a feeling that if it is ultimately resolved at the federal level, that that will make an impact on drug enforcement of marijuana offenses. I mean, the fact is that, and I talk about this in the book, that I don't think there's any dispute historically about the fact that marijuana enforcement in this country has been highly racialized. And communities of color, and this has been documented by various organizations and government institutions, that disproportionate policing of communities of color around cannabis has really led to a number of people serving time and lives really being destroyed for low-level offenses. And to me, I didn't know a lot about this at all. I mean, frankly, it was not something that I had paid attention to, and I didn't understand the connection between cannabis enforcement and mass incarceration. I had no idea. But what really struck me is that while you have people who are making millions of dollars off of this industry, there are still people who are incarcerated, even in states where it is legal. That it was crazy to me. And places also where people who had come out and still had these convictions had not had their records cleared yet. Right now, this summer, just a month ago, Colorado finally, its legislature finally passed a bill that would expunge low-level marijuana convictions and give the governor an executive, the power to basically pardon all of these offenses. Now, if you think about it, I mean, Colorado's market has been, medical has been legal there for more than a decade. And not only were people walking around, who had been incarcerated with marijuana convictions that were not cleared, they were not allowed to actually even work in the industry. So you had people who may have even, worked in the industry before, went to jail, and then they weren't even allowed to be a part of this booming industry that was happening right in front of them. So that was only just remedied this summer. And it actually hasn't been fully remedied because they haven't figured out exactly how they're going to expunge all of those records. Because it's one thing to say that they're going to do it, but then they have to sort of figure out the mechanism to go through all the data and make sure that they are actually clearing the right records and then notifying those people. I'm actually working on a story right now with an organization called Code for America, which is it's a nonprofit that dispatches software engineers to solve big, civic issues. And in California, this group has been working with local DA's offices to help do this very thing, to help use algorithms and use technology to go through all of these criminal records and figure out who should be cleared, make sure that they're cleared, and then creating a system to notify those people to let them know that their records are cleared. But you raise a really good point, which is that this is still evolving. I think every state is trying to figure out, every state that legalizes is doing it a little bit differently. And then in addition to dealing with the criminal justice reform aspect of this, there's also the social justice and social equity piece of making sure that those communities that were harmed by these policies, that they actually have a chance to get into this industry. And so that issue has really only grown in prominence through the years. And I think as you look at what happens here in New York, when the legislature takes it up again, I'm sure Connecticut will be taking it up again as well. I think that the idea of making sure that there's some kind of restorative justice is part of the conversation now in a way that it wasn't originally. And I think that's a really important thing to watch for anybody, as a citizen kind of observing how this is unfolding, is how do you remedy some of these past harms? And it's complicated. It's not, there are lots of conflicting points of view about the best way to go about it, which is one of the reasons why in New York and New Jersey, when the lawmakers were addressing this a couple of years ago, why they ultimately broke down and did not come to a consensus on it.
Yeah, it's very complicated. The whole thing is very, the whole thing. Just even the people trying to do it legitimately with no criminal record are terrified of getting arrested. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a podcast, and so in your podcast, you're continuing the conversation on the new Chardonnay?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always enjoyed writing about entrepreneurs, and I'm just really inspired by what drives people to go for it and put it on the line and chase after a dream when they have a big idea. I just find those types of stories really motivating for myself and inspiring. And I think there are lots of life lessons you can draw from those kinds of pursuits. And so the podcast kind of originated as a way for me to repurpose I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of people for the book. So it gave me a way to repurpose some of that content and maybe be able to highlight people that I wanted to spend more time with in the book that I couldn't. But I think as it evolves, I would like for it to expand beyond cannabis and really in general be about this idea of reinvention and innovation and, you know, sort of why people go for it, why people kind of take that dare to do something new and to try to, in this case, reinvent something that's been around for thousands of years. Like, how does that happen? And so that's really what I hope to get at with the podcast and also future writing that I do. I don't know what my next project is going to be yet, but it'll be something around those themes because I really enjoy kind of delving into those worlds. And also I love focusing on things that I don't know anything about. And I love just spending, you know, years just getting an education on it. I mean, that's a huge luxury as a journalist.
Yes. Well, it's all very interesting, and I can see how this book, The New Chardonnay, follows what you did with Geek Girl Rising. I have this book too. We have this book also at the library. Yeah, and good luck with everything. It's been really wonderful talking to you about this. And again, I think it really makes us look at marijuana so differently, and you illuminate it very well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It honestly is a privilege, and it's one of the best things to be able to, after you spend so much time immersed in a subject, to be able to talk about it and let people know. And more than anything, I really wanted to write a page turner. So I'm so happy that
Yes.
you found it interesting. And I hope that no matter no matter how people feel about legalization, no matter where they stand on it, that they'll just find this a fun read and they'll learn a lot about these people and their crazy adventures and why they would ever want to do something like this. I think to me, it would, I hope it'll appeal to anybody out there who's interested in the entrepreneurial world.
Yes, I enjoyed reading it very much. And I encourage everybody to pick up a signed copy at Diane's Books. They will have them for sale. Thanks again, Heather.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.